By now, you've probably heard about Marketecture Live. We put on 2 sold-out events jam-packed with the most insightful advertising content around. Speakers included Eric Seufert, James Barrow from Universal Ads, Mark Grether from PayPal, Olivia Corey from House, and of course, me and the Marketecture crew. Well, this spring, we're coming back bigger and better with a 2-day that's shaping up to be a must-attend event. March 10th and 11th in New York, we're putting on the new tentpole event in collaboration with Adweek and TV Red, and you absolutely need to be there. Early bird tickets are 25% off, and qualified brands and agencies can be comped. Go to marketecturelive.com right now. That's marketecturelive.com to get the early bird discount.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to the Monopoly Report. The Monopoly Report is dedicated to chronicling and analyzing the impact of antitrust and other regulations on the global advertising economy. If you are new to the Monopoly Report, you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter at monopoly-report.com, and you can check out all of the Monopoly Report podcasts at monopolyreportpod.com. I'm Alan Chappell. This week, my guest is Vermont Representative Monique Priestley. Monique Priestley has been a Democratic member of the Vermont House of Representatives for the Orange 2 District since 2023. She was previously the executive director of a nonprofit community workspace called The Space on Main, which she founded in 2017. And I'll leave her full bio in the show notes. A few weeks ago, I had Connecticut State Senator James Moroney on the pod to discuss his experience crafting a privacy law at the state level. Vermont is in a different place, as they've been trying to get a privacy bill passed for a number of years. And I wanted to better understand the process from Vermont's perspective. So let's get to it. Representative Priestley, how are you? Thanks for coming on my pod.
Good. Thanks for having me, Alan.
So where are you these days? Are you in the great state of Vermont?
I am not. Right now I'm in Washington, D.C. I have a number of different legislative, there was like a privacy conference the last couple of days, and then National Conference of State Legislators.
Oh, very cool. You were at Daniel Solov's, were you?
Yeah. I had hosted a panel. It was David Strauss, Kara Williams, Ryan Krieger, and Rep. Shelley Kloba. So we did a let's cut the bullshit, why do privacy and AI bills fail? So it was really good.
Oh, fantastic. I wish I had attended, because I feel like we're going to end up building off of a lot of that here today.
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely.
But Professor Solov is great. I've had him on the pod, and just such a smart guy. And so I've heard his privacy salons are really must-attend events in the privacy community.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, this was the first forum I went to. I went to the last 2 salons, and it's honestly the most helpful space to be in, because it's practitioners, technologists, and compliance lawyers, and they know how the laws get applied. So it's a really helpful space to learn from.
Oh, yeah, I would imagine. So how did you get involved in privacy? Like, what's your origin story with all this?
So the quick background basically is like from being a little kid, my uncle and stuff showed me how to take apart computers, make websites. That continued really my whole high school, college, took on every role from computer support, web design, customer support, network administration, database management, design, and then pretty much every role as far as software companies go, except for heavy back-end engineering and sales, but pretty much everything else.
I would bet that 90% of my listeners have it the exact opposite, where they are tech support for their parents and uncles and aunts. And so you got somebody who is actually the other way around, which is just fantastic.
Yeah. Well, when I was 8, I definitely play the tech support role now as an adult.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think that's just such is life. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process for getting to a state law. Now, we had Representative James Moroney on from Connecticut, and he came at it from the perspective of, from start to finish, how did he get a law passed in Connecticut? You're sort of right now in Vermont, you're still on we're trying to get that across the goal line. And I would really welcome your perspective. And I would love to start with industry lobbying efforts. It sounds like you touched a little bit of that with Dan Solov's event in DC, but what are some of the challenges that you and your colleagues face when you're going up against the industry lobbying efforts that might have pushed back as you tried to craft a privacy law in Vermont? And what's your plan to overcome them?
Yeah, so the privacy bill, so this is my third year going into my fourth year in the legislature. In my second year is when I really took lead on the consumer tech stuff. And it is the most fierce lobbying that people who have been in the building for their entire careers, 40 years, 50 years, have ever seen on a bill. And we funneled everyone through me, basically, because, some of the barriers are that, one, it's like highly technical content. And so I just said, I come from an entire career of different tech roles. I've often played a role where I am being a liaison between highly technical people and highly not, like Luddites, basically, folks. And so I have a passion for early adopting, really learning tech. I love tech, but then also I really have a passion for getting people not be so scared and to learn how to use tech to basically change their life. And so in this space, like most of my colleagues, when we're dealing with highly technical bills, it's really hard to participate in a conversation for them when they don't have the basics. So that's one. That's like kind of the ground level, where we're at.
So you're kind of not just tech support for your uncle now, but you're kind of like tech liaison and support for the Vermont congressional.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Very much so. Very much so. Any tech issue. I help people with their email. I help people increase the fonts on a Word doc before they print it out. But then understanding the implementation of these laws. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the lobbying effort, do you see this as like a communication issue where you're talking past each other, an education issue where there's just certain subtleties around the impact of the laws that they're trying to educate you on, or is it a greed issue, or is it something else?
All of the above, but I'll address the kind of the first item you brought up. So other than education and getting people on the same page and having a conversation, often how lobbying works is often an international firm will have like a national lobbyist, which will have regional lobbyists, which will have contract lobbyists at the local level. And the local lobbyists are ones who are just trying to do their jobs, but they're tackling maybe 20 clients at once. They're not experts in any given space. They're not tech experts. So they're similar to my colleagues in a way that they are being fed talking points from the regional, which are being fed talking points from the national, which are being fed talking points from the teams of lawyers from these corporations. And so anytime that I or anybody else asks a question about a thing, they have to run it up that flagpole and then back down that flagpole. And so it means that there is 5 weeks sometimes of a delay between when I ask a question about Redline and when they get the approved, run it up the chain and then run it back down to get approval to tell me an answer. And then I'm like, okay, here's another question. They have to run it back up again and back down. And that's for every single thing. Then you layer on tactics of stonewalling. You layer on tactics of telling my colleagues I'm full of shit. You layer on tactics of not being willing to have a conversation or misinforming people. There's just all these things.
So that sounds significantly less efficient than just typing in a question to ChatGPT, no? I guess, because I would hope that the accuracy of the response that you're getting, or at least the credibility behind it, is accurate enough to justify a 5-week period. But boy, that sounds like a lot of time.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. And that's one of the reasons I go to the Solov events and things like that. And I spend, anybody watching me on LinkedIn, I'm spending all of my time networking and traveling around the country. And it's to be able to skip that entire process and have the conversations with the people who are actually doing the work and know the technology that can educate me on my quality.
Sure. And fair enough. You've been 3 years putting together a privacy law for Vermont. And I'm curious, what are the components of a good privacy law, in your opinion?
Yeah, lots of different things. But in this case, I would say it really comes down to pillars of rights for the consumers and right to know where their information is, what is being represented about them. If there's errors, that they can fix it. If they don't want it to be up there, that they get it deleted. So consumer rights, data minimization. So in some way or form, making it so that companies are only collecting the information they need to do a thing that the consumer is asking them to do. And generally like having in some kind of enforcement mechanism that if somebody is violating those things and not doing them, that a consumer has a way to seek redress on that.
So, I mean, all of those on their face seem reasonable and certainly understandable. Like DSARs,
sure.
I mean, 20 other states offer them. So
exactly.
It wouldn't seem like that's the highest bar. Some of the data minimization things are tricky. I've been a big proponent of data minimization, but I also recognize that, number one, it's really hard to enforce against because it really involves like a proctology exam if you're really going to be able to like figure out if the company is really engaging in data minimization. You can, at the edges, you can always find out if they are not. If it's an inch away or foot away, sometimes a little bit more difficult. But those things seem fairly reasonable. I'm curious, were you looking at something like what Maryland has done with data minimization?
So actually, I had a great call this morning with somebody who's in compliance for Fortune 500 companies, and I felt actually great coming away from that call. So we started more or less where Maryland was trying to do, but listening again, having those conversations with technologists and compliance officers in the field. Like I heard the concerns that there was a lot of ambiguity with the Maryland minimization, and I spent a bunch of basically all last session trying to clean up data min and all of the ambiguity that I was hearing. And so like this call I had this morning, they were like, you actually did clean it up significantly from where you introduced it. I have an amendment from May 30th of S71, which is the Senate bill that passed the Senate and came back to the House, and we reset it. So
cool. I look forward to reading that. I haven't yet. But
please, I encourage everyone to actually read the bill.
I do try. I'm curious though, with respect to the private right of action. I mean, that's been an ongoing bugaboo between the political and the business communities for a long time, and might be the top reason we don't have a federal privacy law at this point, because I think we got pretty close. And I think one of the top 2 or 3 reasons was certainly the private right of action. So how do you create a private right of action? Well, first of all, let me ask, what's driving that in your opinion?
I mean, and actually for anybody who's listening who hasn't read Lauren Schultz's Private Rights of Action and Privacy Law, I had her testify for it's actually my website, the best 20 minutes of defending a PRA I've ever heard in my life. And she was just basically the AG doesn't represent people. The AG represents the state. And when you have individual people who are being harmed, they should, our whole country, we're able to sue for everything. So why are we making it different for digital tech policy? Come on.
No, but it isn't just tech. I mean, it's not just tech. It's really, these apply to all businesses.
Totally.
I will admit that big tech definitely, has set up the regulatory environment in a way to protect themselves. So I'm sympathetic to that as an argument. But my question though is, why is it that an AG is perfectly okay in enforcing a consumer protection law, but isn't okay enforcing a privacy law?
Well, an AG isn't necessarily when it comes to car issue, if you were to get in a car accident because of a faulty thing with your engine, that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying tech as in big tech. I'm saying tech as in digital privacy is technology. The data that we're using in an online space is what I'm saying when I say tech. And so that's everything. That's everything. Car insurance, that's everything. But so, the AG will say they don't have resources. They're not going to go after anything but the shiniest of cases. And when it comes to actual liability, when it comes to product liability, we often do have the ability to sue. Our Consumer Protection Act from the 1960s for Vermont has a private right of action in it with statutory damages.
It does. And so I'm curious, because the fear, and I say this from somebody in the ad space, I see SEPA and I see the VPPA and I'm like, oh my goodness, this just isn't helping anybody, although it's probably letting some law firms get richer, and that's, fine. But in Vermont, when it comes to some of these consumer protection lawsuits, has that turned into a similar bugaboo, or is it hasn't? And if it hasn't, why do you think that is?
Yeah, so it hasn't, and actually we've been trying to get the number of cases that have happened since the 60s, and it's just not it just hasn't been accessed that much. And so actually when we passed our age appropriate design code last session, we referenced the underlying private right of action to give families access if a student like commits, if a kid commits suicide or has reputational harm or sextortion or, any number of things that can happen. But yeah, it hasn't been abused is the point. And like even my health, my data, like I know that's a narrowly focused kind of on health data, but even that went into effect and that's only had one lawsuit. It doesn't have statutory damages. So like I get that. But I do think that there like needs to be enforcement mechanism. And even when I'm like out at SOLAV events, for instance, and go out to drinks with people and they're like, why are you obsessed with the private right of action? I'm like, well, will you actually follow a law if it doesn't have teeth? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, great. Well, give me 3 other options. Like, give me the options that will make you change your behavior if you're doing something bad.
Okay. So one thing I would gently push back on is I don't know who you're having drinks with, but not everybody operates that way. And I would say that there are certainly companies who do everything they can to completely skirt the spirit, if not the letter of the law. But there's also a bunch of companies who are at least trying their best to figure out, 20-something state laws and to do their best to meet them. And if you remove the statutory damages component, that would seem helpful. I think the concern, and I love your reaction to this, and some of this is just devil's advocate on my part. What about the slippery slope? I mean, I'm sure you hear that argument constantly. But once you have a private right of action and you say no statutory damages, you're really just, a one single edit away from next year instituting something that does have damages. And so at that, what's your response to those concerns?
Yeah, I mean, every bill is one edit away from being a completely different bill. So I don't know. Everything is potentially. I mean, the slippery slope thing is kind of one of those talking points that I'm like, whatever. Everything else.
Wait a minute, though. Like, I'm going to push back on the talking points part because James Maroney was on here, and I think you said listen to that interview, and
I did.
Like he kind of admitted that the slippery slope is really a thing. Like they've gone back 3 times to revamp their law, and so I don't think that's a bad thing. But I don't think the slippery slope is entirely a talking point. I think we've got evidence that
it goes both ways. It's like super subjective though, because like slippery slope for us might be that industry comes in and takes out a comma and completely breaks a bill. So like it does go both ways. It's for everybody. So
but we don't hold the pen.
Sure, well, you do. I mean, like, I'm not saying you, but like lobbyists, like for sure. I mean, there's more power in lobbying at this point. There's more lobbyists in our building than there are legislators, and they're paid full time, and we're paid $15,000 a year. So like, there is a power imbalance there. Like,
I would say $15,000 a year versus $15,000 an hour are very, very different.
Exactly,
different things, and that's I can't argue with that at all. So you said DSARs, we've said data minimization. You mentioned private right of action. I'm curious of what your thinking is when it comes to sensitive personal data. You've got health, location, race, biometric. Biometric's an interesting one because I feel like that's going to be an evolving definition probably for the rest of our natural lives, at the very least, because you're just, for better or worse, your companies are figuring out more and more ways to see what's going on in our bodies. And those definitions are going to change over time pretty significantly. But what's Vermont's view on sensitive data?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, we're trying to do the same exact thing that Maroney did. I mean, it is Maroney's bill when it comes to the underlying that we're layering on top of. So it gives heightened protections and geofencing provisions around consumer health data. And then we have biometric, like the biometric data, consumer health data, and minor data. And I think in a large part, like the sensitive data, we do want to protect that more. Like we want to protect somebody's DNA and fingerprints and facial scan in a different way than we do their email address and their PO box,
Yeah, and I think all that makes sense. The folks that at least in the ad space, and that's really our primary audience here, are for the most part staying away from, we don't have anything to do with biometric data. Health can be, that tends to be a challenge for many of them, because I think everybody agrees cancer sufferer is way out of the ballpark, but has a headache, might need aspirin. There's folks out there who are creating segments in that area. But I like the idea of calling it Maroney's bill. By the way, we get Maroney's law.
Sure. He'll love that too. I'm going to see him in half an hour. I'll let him know. Let him know that's what I'm calling him.
Fantastic. So Vermont was the first state to create a data broker registry, but the Vermont registry seemed more focused on what I'll call old school PII, like identifiable personal data, emails, phone, postal address. And I'm curious whether Vermont is thinking about updating that and maybe making it a little broader, maybe taking a cue from California or Oregon or Texas.
Yeah, so we're definitely, as far as those three other states that have it, in general, so the 121, which is the three-part kind of bill that we were working on for 23 and 24 that ultimately had the war over the veto and the PRA, that had basically updates to the data broker registry in it. And so this year I separated the kids bill, the comprehensive bill, and the data broker update bill. And so I have several data broker bills, a Daniels Law, and then also essentially delete act updates to the data broker registry.
So is Vermont going to build its own mechanism to enable people to enter in and have their data deleted from data broker registries?
So we have more or less what is a delete act bill, and I'm not sure if we're going to push that this session or not. But the idea would be to create our own drop mechanism that is funded by registration fees. It would take a couple years to happen and to build up a fund, but yeah, the idea is to try to get to where California is at on that.
See, that's an interesting one just from a public policy standpoint, because if the 20 or so states that now have privacy bills all do their own delete act, at $6,000 a year times 20, that's real money. And so that seems like a challenge to have a bunch of different states recreating what California has already done. However, I have no idea if California has any interest or inclination, and there may be security issues around, sharing that functionality more broadly. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how that all develops. I don't really have a question there unless you have an observation, and I know the states.
Just observation is like, yes, I mean, for sure. I mean, I feel like the data broker issues and breaches from, collection and just the hyper targeting of everyone. Like, I will say, like, the multi-state group legislators in particular are very much, we're all talking about Delete Act and Daniels Law and otherwise data broker updates together for sure. So there's multiple bills coming out this year.
Well, we'll keep our eyes peeled. So related to that, I'm curious to understand what your thoughts are regarding authorized agents, the entities that on behalf of consumers make these types of requests. And firstly, it's not clear to me yet how the authorized agent business is going to jibe with the Delete Act, because if you have a separate mechanism that is sort of sponsored by the state to enable people to delete their data, I wonder if that takes away at least part of the value prop for authorized agents. But leaving that aside, right now that's California, and it'll take a while for other states to adopt it. I'm curious, what's your thought on the authorized agents? Is the bill going to support that?
Yeah, so I mean, even the comprehensive privacy bill supports that, and I get that could be concern around how the agents operate and making sure they are doing things appropriately, and that there could be a whole cottage industry, although there's lots of free options and stuff out there too. But on the other hand, Jeff Jokish has a database of 8,600 data brokers out there. So you can't expect an individual person, if they're on even a fraction of those, to be able to go to every single one of those sites and request deletion or update either. So I think there is room for something. And I'm not quite sure if we're where it needs to be, but I do think there's a need for something there.
8,600 separate data brokers. You don't happen to know off the top of your head how many data brokers are registered in California currently or in Vermont?
No,
8,600 seems like a lot.
It's a lot. That's internationally. And Obscure IQ is the one that has that database. But so across Vermont, Texas, Oregon, and California, there was a study that came out about comparing the number of registrations per state and then what the likely gap is. And I think it was 600 to 700, I think somewhere in there was like what the number should be across all of the states. And in some states it was much lower, and in some states it was almost there. So there isn't consistency across the states. And actually part of that is the definitions not being consistent across the states. And then part of that is also just people not registering, like companies not registering.
So my perception is that there's sort of a mindset of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so anybody that is helping to reduce the scourge, and I'm using air quotes here, of data brokers is the friend of a legislator. And I'm not saying you, I'm just saying just in general. One of the concerns I have is that a percentage of the authorized agents are absolutely trying to do the right thing. And there is a percentage of that constituency that is conning people and is really serving to annoy and create a distraction for companies in the ad space. Like if all you collect is names and email addresses and I'm a mobile ad network and all I have is maids, like why are you sending me anything?
Sure.
The answer is usually, well, you're registered as a data broker, so we're just going to do that. And there's no way to get off of that list. Anyway, I'm just curious, have you thought through like what a set of rules around what the authorized agents might be able to do?
Ooh, you know what? I can't actually remember if we really outlined that, Alan. Honestly, like we definitely gave like what their permissions were, and I'm not sure that we outlined what they shouldn't do. I mean, so that's something to think about for sure.
No, and that would just be my ask I know that there are a number of state legislators who listen to this pod and thank you all for listening. But that's sort of my plea is that it strikes me as unfair to unleash something onto the marketplace that where at least in some instances the cure is just as bad as the disease.
Yeah, and I mean that's interesting too, because like that we get that I had that with a local lobbyist who is saying the car chasing people going after people for Daniel's Law, and at some point I'm like, he would say like, my client gets like 3,000 a month requests, and I'm like, don't know where your argument is because we don't have a law yet, so we haven't prompted the 3,000 a month yet from Vermont because are they going to do it anyways? Will a law stop or help that at all? I'm not sure. So like there's some pieces that like we may not have control over because people are going to do what they're going to do. But where we can help, like I would look into that.
Well, fair enough. And that would be super helpful, I think.
Yeah.
So the European Union has experimented with setting different privacy and competition rules for the tech giants. And Florida has sort of done that too, in that the thresholds for their privacy law, it's at $1 billion. So that sort of eliminates a fair percentage of the marketplace. And then the U.S. has also done that a little bit with respect to some of the telecommunications industries historically. And I'm curious if you see Vermont potentially adopting a different rule set where the size or the scale or the scope of data collected are particularly large.
Yeah, so for sure. So I mean, so that was when I was joking earlier about like I hope people actually read the bill goes into my private right of act, like that in elements of the bill that actually does change things depending on size is the private right of action as I have it right now is only applicable to businesses that make in revenue a yearly revenue of $500 million or more per year. That's only like 70 Vermont businesses, and most of those aren't data businesses. They're like manufacturing and stuff. But at the same time, I've definitely heard the arguments for all of the data privacy bills, all 20 of them or whatever, being kind of unfair to small businesses as far as competition with the big guys goes and like undue burden as far as resources go. I hear that. And I'm actually working on trying to look at doing some kind of safe harbor or something that's like a lower burden impact assessment, like checklist for small businesses. I don't know what that threshold is going to be, but it's definitely something that I'm hoping to work on for this session.
And that's an interesting point regarding the private right of action. And look, I'm not a big tech lobbyist, and so I tend to work with the smaller to mid-size advertising technology companies. So, of course, your challenge being that the lobbying efforts that have the most force behind them are exactly those who are going to be impacted by the threshold that you've set. And so that's going to be a bit of a challenge for you, I imagine.
Actually, the real challenge as far as the lobbying goes is that the big guys are members of things like our statewide Chamber of Commerce and Tech Alliance. And so they actually will be scared. And instead of telling the small businesses what's really going on, they'll say like, Monique's bill is going to kill the economy, so you should tell the governor that this is horrible, not actually explaining to them things like the private right of action won't apply to any of you.
So how important is it to have parity in terms of the rule set as between the different state privacy laws? And then, because I know, or I've learned that there's a fair amount of communication between at a number of levels, between the various state legislatures. Is there a concerted effort to ensure that there's at least, nothing that's a crazy outlier in terms of the rule set at the state level?
Yeah, I mean, all of us want to have something that's like implementable and doesn't put too much stress on businesses. So like where we can have consistency, like we're all starting off with copies of each other. So where we can do that, that's where we want to be. And in some cases, we also all collectively want to push the needle a little, like move the needle a little bit in some cases. So that's where you have a little bit of movement. But for things like, for instance, like I talked to a compliance guy because one of my legislators wanted to decrease or increase increase the amount of days for responding to a complaint from 45 days to 60 days. And I talked to a compliance officer and they're like, please don't do it. It doesn't make any sense. We've automated systems for the 45 days. Like everybody just goes to the strictest standard and then works from there. So if you're trying to like give us a break, it's just not actually going to help us because we're still going to do the strictest. So that's things like we're trying to move the needle a little bit. Like you said, biometric, like now there's sweat tracking. Now there's subvocal tracking. Now there's like minds tracking. And so sometimes we have to move it a little bit. And sometimes it like doesn't make sense to change things.
I still think that the number one thing that is going to propel a federal privacy law is one or two states doing something that is just, that the business community sees as out of, beyond the pale. And by the way, I'm not sure that a federal privacy law is a bad outcome. But if the state experiment seeks to continue in its current form, it would seem to me that some level of parity would be helpful to that goal. Now, Vermont, they may very well have a different set of issues and see the world a little bit differently than, I don't know, California or Texas or Oregon. And so there are things that unique to the mindset, the cultural of Vermont citizens that you guys need to address. But I'm just saying that like parity, I think would be the most palatable path forward.
Sure. I mean, actually, it's not as much cultural differences as at this point, we all know that the Washington model was introduced by big tech in order to counter California's proposal, right? And that's what's being spread with the help of lobbying. So there's also like, do we actually want the industry model that industry is comfortable with versus a stronger consumer protection model to be the one that is represented for the federal government to pass? So,
yeah, that's a valid point. Although that's where the slippery slope comes in, because what I think has happened is that you get that as a starting point, and then gradually over time the standard gets set higher. I mean, that's certainly the case in California. I mean, they've made a cottage industry over there around revisiting and creating new rules, and that's going to be really interesting to see how that emerges in other states. One observation. So historically, the first thing lawmakers usually do after they've created a set of privacy rules is exempt themselves from those rules. And as you may know, we just completed a very spirited election for mayor here in New York City. And I cannot begin to tell you how the number of unsolicited texts and calls I've received over the last month or so. And so how do politicians meaningfully rein in the data broker industry when it seems like collectively, at least, you're the biggest customer?
Yeah, no, fair. I hate this. It's bullshit. So, I actually, I wanted to capture political advertising, and I agree. I think it's a big source of scams in general. And so I actually had both the statewide party and the DNC trying to basically having this conversation back and forth about whether or not they should kill the privacy bill my first year on it. And I ended up having conversations with them back and forth, and also with the AG, because the political piece actually is like some kind of a gray area as far as whether or not it counts as consumer, as a consumer transaction. So that's like a gray area. But generally, my conversation was like, are you kidding me? Like, we're putting people at risk. You're going to try to kill this consumer protection bill because you want your donation money? Like, I will go to the press with this. Like, what are you doing? So, I mean, I did have that. And I had that fight with a lot of different industries that were all trying to be exempted, especially when they're trying to claim that they're fighting and trying to protect people.
I would agree, although I'm going to play maybe devil's advocate here. I mean, you are starting a Senate run. So the first thing, and look, I've never run for anything, so I'm just hearing things that can ban. But one of the first things you do is you put together a donors list. And then the second thing you do is you put together, or you obtain through the Republicans or the Democratic Party, a list of voters so that you can begin contacting them so that you can build or at least grow your platform. So, how do you address that as somebody who's trying to do right by consumers, but, is that going to be are you willing to let that cost you a Senate race?
Yeah, so I've been battling with this. So, last race, I didn't buy the database. I didn't want to buy it. I thought the data was a mess, honestly. It is a mess. And I didn't think it was worth putting people at risk. And then this year, I'm not using Act Blue. So I actually went to the party and I said, just so you know, I'm not going to use our party's platform. I'm using Good Change. And I had a demo with Good Change and immediately was like, I don't care about anything you're going to show me. Please answer the question of whether or not you're sharing and selling people's data, because I don't want to, and I'm not going to use your platform. Like, I was prepared to just use an online form, like Cognito Forms or something, with the heightened encryption protection to sacrifice that. Like, I don't want to put people at risk. I do think it would be super hypocritical of me to do that. And I think it's ridiculous that we put people at risk.
No, and it would be, I would imagine, a little embarrassing to have, the vendor that you were using and talking about get dinged by the AG in some other state for selling and sharing data in a way that was,
political campaigns. I learned from talking to Good Change that political campaigns, the biggest source of revenue for most political campaigns is selling people's data. And I'm not about that. So yeah, it's horrifying. I don't agree with that.
Understood. So I got one more question for you. And it's about your Senate campaign. And it's an important one. To what degree will I be able to claim credit if you were to prevail in your Senate campaign? Because I think this interview is really going to take off.
Thanks, Alan. I don't know how many people are going to ask for money to donate to me.
We'll get the campaigning started. Monique, this has been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you taking a couple of minutes and sharing your thoughts with me. And I do wish you the best in terms of your campaign. One of the things that I've learned just in our brief interactions, as well as I've read a little bit about your history and some of the work that you've been doing, is that you are out there trying to make the world a better place. And that is not always the case with our political system as it is. So God bless and just keep moving.
Thanks, Ellen. And if I could just make a plug for anybody listening, especially in the ad tech space, anybody who is frustrated by the laws or wants to participate in the laws or just have a conversation or says I'm full of shit on the podcast or whatever they want to do, I would love to talk to them. So I'm just if people want to reach out, priestleyvt.com, easiest way to find me, or, Google me. But I invite those conversations, and even if it's coffee when I'm traveling. So.
Well, fantastic, Monique. And I'll tell you, I get a lot of those "you're full of shit" type of conversations, but I love them because that's how I learn.
I love them too. I love them too, and that's why I love them.
I would rather just speak my mind and allow others to speak theirs. And so I'm so glad that you came on to share your truth.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you so much.
That was a fun discussion. A few quick thoughts. First, at some point, I'd like to see if I could get one of the industry lobbyists on the pod to share their perspective. Second, this is sort of a Captain Obvious statement, but the private right of action isn't going away as a political issue. And I'm looking forward to listening to Dr. Lauren Schultz's discussion of the private right of action that Monique referenced in our discussion today. And I'll include it in the show notes so that you can check it out too. I've been watching what's taking place in connection with the California Information Privacy Act and the Video Privacy Protection Act. And as a result, I'm a bit wary of introducing a PRA into other privacy laws. Maybe Vermont has found the secret sauce that enables consumers to be protected without creating an unnecessary and unhelpful distraction. I guess we'll see. Third, I'm hopeful that we'll start to see at least some legislative focus on setting guardrails for the authorized agent businesses. And finally, I hope to have more lawmakers and regulators on the pod to share their views as we head into what I think will be a very active 2026. We have a bunch of other fantastic guests coming up on the Monopoly Report podcast over the next few weeks. Please subscribe to the show at monopolyreportpod.com or on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Marketecture Podcast. New episodes come out every Friday, and an insightful vendor interview is published each Monday. You can subscribe to our library of hundreds of executive interviews at marketecture.tv. You can also sign up for free for our weekly newsletter with my original strategic insights on the week's news at news.marketecture.tv. And if you're feeling social, we operate a vibrant Slack community that you can apply to join at adtechgod.com.